There's no greater thrill than achieving the impossible. It's a feeling that's almost heavenly. However, the pursuit of such feats comes with a caution. Chasing after dangerous records just to gain recognition as a Guinness World Record holder can lead to devastating consequences. Unfortunately, some individuals are driven by this desire, embarking on deadly quests. In the end, not only do they fail to achieve their goal, but they also lose the chance to learn from their mistakes. Join us as we narrate their stories. Lowell Richard Bales was a man who lived for speed. Born in the small town of Mason, Illinois, on January 24, 1900, Bales's life would take him from the quiet fields of the Midwest to the roaring engines and tense competition of the golden age of air racing. It was a time when the world was enamored with the possibilities of aviation, and men like Bales were at the forefront, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. Growing up as the eldest child of Hattie and Rayford E. Bales, Lowell was always drawn to the mechanics of things, his hands constantly tinkering with anything that had wheels or gears. His curiosity led him to pursue an education in mining engineering at the University of Illinois, a practical choice given the booming industrial age in which he was born. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Eye trouble forced him to abandon his studies, and he found himself working as an electrician in the mines around Illinois. It was hard, honest work, but the darkness of the mines was a far cry from the endless skies he dreamed of. That dream began to take shape when he started taking flying lessons from a former World War I instructor pilot. The thrill of leaving the earth and soaring above it all was intoxicating, and Bales was hooked. His first plane, a surplus Curtiss JN-4 Jenny, became his pride and joy. But fate intervened once more when his plane was mistaken for an enemy aircraft during a gang war in Herrin, Illinois, and was blown up by one of the infamous gang leaders. Bales went back to work in the mines briefly, but soon his love for flying took over. He traveled around the country, performing aerial stunts and giving rides to adventure seekers. It was a dangerous lifestyle, but it paid the bills and kept him in the air. By 1928, Bales had partnered with H. Roscoe Brinton to start a flying service in Springfield, Massachusetts. The venture was a success, but the Great Depression soon brought it to a halt as orders for aircraft dried up. The Granville Brothers Aircraft Company, a small business in Springfield, saw the potential of air racing as a way to survive the economic downturn. They believed that a victory in one of the major air races could bring them the publicity and the sales they needed. To make this dream a reality, they formed the Springfield Air Racing Association, a group of local businessmen who bought shares to fund the creation of racing planes. Bales, who had a reputation as a skilled and daring pilot, was eager to be a part of it. He contributed $500 of his own money to secure his place as the pilot of their most ambitious creation yet, the GB Model Z. The GB Model Z was a marvel of engineering, a plane designed for one purpose: speed. With its stubby fuselage and powerful engine, it was a handful to fly, but in the right hands it was unbeatable. Bales proved this when he piloted the GBZ to victory in the 1931 Thompson Trophy race, one of the most prestigious events in the world of air racing. The win made him a hero, and GBZ a legend. But for Bales, it was just the beginning. On December 5, 1931, at Wayne County Airport in Detroit, Michigan, Bales was preparing for a record attempt that would secure his place in history. He aimed to set a new land plane speed record, pushing the GBZ to its absolute limit. The plane, already a proven winner, had been fine-tuned for this very moment. Bales knew the risks, but he was confident in his abilities and in the plane that had carried him to victory before. As he took off that cold December day, the roar of the engine filled the air as Bales climbed into the sky, pushing the GBZ faster and faster, the world below becoming a blur. Everything was going according to plan until suddenly the plane pitched up violently. The right wing, unable to withstand the strain, folded like paper, the result of a suspected aileron flutter. In an instant, the aircraft was out of control, spiraling toward the ground with a terrifying speed. Bales fought to regain control, but it was too late. The GBZ slammed into the ground alongside a railroad track, the impact so fierce that it exploded in a ball of fire. The force of the crash threw Bales's body 300 feet from the wreckage, and the smoke from the crash could be seen for miles. The aviation community mourned the loss of Lowell Bales, a man who had pushed the limits of what was possible in the skies. He was a hero to many, a symbol of the daring spirit that defined the early days of aviation. In the blistering summer heat of Tehran, the capital of Iran, August 27, 2005, was supposed to be the day that Javad Palisbanian would write his name in the records of history. The Azadi Sports Stadium had become a sea of spectators. Hundreds had gathered, packed into the stands, eager to witness what was touted to be one of the most audacious motorcycle stunts the world had ever seen. Today, he aimed to soar over 22 buses parked side by side, an unprecedented feat, a record to shatter all records. Javad, aged 44, had spent most of his life chasing the thrill that came with speed, defying gravity, and tempting fate. His stunts had always been a blend of precision, timing, and an almost uncanny understanding of the laws of physics. A month before, he had soared over a 153-foot-wide river, which left his audience breathless. But today's challenge was different. The buses formed a barrier that seemed to stretch on forever, and he couldn't afford any error. Javad mounted his bike and started the engine. The motorcycle streaked across the stadium before hitting the ramp with a force that sent it soaring into the sky, the front wheel lifting off the ground, followed by the rear. For a brief, glorious moment, Javad was flying. Below him, the buses passed by, one after the other, as the distance grew and the gap between success and failure narrowed. He cleared the first few buses with ease, the speed and height of his jump carrying him further than many had anticipated. But then the front wheel began to dip just slightly, but enough to change the trajectory of the jump and write a horrible history. The motorcycle collided with the roof of the 13th bus in a sickening crash. The bike crumpled, metal twisting under the force, as Javad was thrown forward, his body hitting the bus with a force that was as brutal as it was final. The crash was instant. The silence that followed was deafening. State television, which had been broadcasting the attempt, quickly cut the footage, unable to show what had just transpired. The newscaster's voice, trembling slightly, explained that the scene was too disturbing to air. In the stadium, the crowd remained frozen, the shock of what they had witnessed too immense to process immediately. Javad Palisbanian lay still. The challenge that was meant to solidify his legacy had instead claimed his life. He had boasted of breaking the world record and doing something for his country to be proud of. But it isn't the same now. In the quiet town of Kantale, Sri Lanka, 24-year-old Janaka Basnayake was known for his daring feats that pushed human endurance to its limits. Unlike others who sought fame through conventional means, Janaka's pursuits were perilous, fueled by an insatiable desire to test his physical capabilities. His fascination with such challenges began in childhood, evolving from harmless dares to dangerous stunts as he grew older. Among his most audacious feats were 2 previous attempts to bury himself alive, both of which he survived, emerging with a sense of triumph that only fueled his ambition. The small town watched with a mix of awe and apprehension as Janaka prepared for his ultimate challenge, setting a world record for the longest time buried alive. On March 3, 2012, which was Saturday, Janaka stood at the edge of a freshly dug 10-foot deep trench with the air thick with anticipation. Without hesitation, he descended into the trench, lying down as his family and friends sealed him in with wooden boards and earth. For the next couple of hours, Janaka remained buried, locked in a silent battle against time and human limits. Above ground, his family waited anxiously, aware that this attempt was different, deeper, longer, and far more dangerous. At 4 p.m., the family and friends began to uncover the trench. The soil that had been so carefully placed was now being removed with frantic urgency. The wooden boards were pried away to reveal the still figure of Janaka lying within. The scene that greeted them was far from what they had hoped. Janaka's body lay motionless, his face pale and lifeless, devoid of the vitality that once defined him. He was quickly pulled from the trench, but the silence was crushing. Desperation gripped them as they rushed Janaka to the nearest hospital. The brief journey felt endless, every second weighed down by fear. Upon arrival, doctors worked frantically, but the grim reality soon became clear. Janaka Basnayake, the daring young man who sought to defy death, was pronounced dead on arrival. The cause of death remained uncertain. The initial post-mortem provided no clear answers, leaving a cloud of uncertainty over the tragedy. Whether it was a lack of oxygen, the crushing pressure of the earth, or simply the human body's limits, the result was the same. Janaka's life ended in the pursuit of a dream that, though extraordinary, proved ultimately unattainable. The vast sea has long beckoned those who dare to test the limits of human endurance. Among these adventurers was Guy Garman, known as Doc Deep, who sought to push the boundaries of deep-sea diving to their extremes. On August 15, 2015, Garman's quest to break the world record for the deepest dive ended tragically, marking his name in the records of diving history. Garman, an ENT or ear, nose, and throat doctor from St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, had meticulously planned for years to dive to an unprecedented depth of 1,200 feet, surpassing the existing record of 1,090 feet. Driven by a desire to make history, he chose Long Reach, a reef outside Christiansted Harbor, as the site for his dive. The location, familiar to him, was where the underwater world abruptly dropped into the black abyss. For 2 years, Garman prepared extensively, installing a 300-foot dive line anchored by a 250-pound weight. He assembled nearly 400 pounds of equipment, including oversized tanks and dive computers. A few months prior, he completed a solitary descent to 815 feet, setting the stage for his final challenge. On the morning of August 15th, Garman entered the water, weighed down by his gear. His son, Kip, accompanied him to 200 feet before watching his father continue alone into the depths. It was the last time Kip would see him alive. Garman's plan was simple in its structure, but required flawless execution. He would descend to 1,200 feet, using the dive line as his guide, and then begin his slow ascent. At 350 feet, he was to meet his support team, who would accompany him during the grueling 10-hour decompression process. Each stage of the ascent would require stopping every 10 feet to avoid the deadly risks of decompression sickness, a condition that can strike even the most experienced divers. But the sea, as vast as it is mysterious, has a way of rewriting even the best-laid plans. The clock ticked on, and Garman's support team waited at 350 feet, their eyes scanning the murky waters for any sign of him. They knew he should have arrived within 38 minutes, but the time came and went with no sign of the doctor. Anxiety turned to dread as they realized something had gone wrong. The sea around them remained silent, devoid of the bubbles that would signal Garman's return from the abyss. The support divers remained in the water, desperate to catch a glimpse of anything that might lead them to Garman. But the sea, now a menacing expanse of uncertainty, offered no clues. It was as if Garman had been swallowed whole by the deep water he sought to conquer. 3 agonizing days later, after a frantic search that yielded nothing but despair, Garman's body was finally recovered. The medical examiner's report confirmed what everyone had feared. Garman had drowned, his ambitious attempt to break the world record ending in the most tragic of ways. The details of what happened during those fateful moments at depth remain a mystery, locked away in the dark waters where he took his last breath. In the aftermath, the diving community was left to grapple with the implications of Garman's death. Many experts pointed to a dangerous combination of overconfidence and a lack of sufficient experience. Despite his meticulous planning, Garman had ventured far beyond the capabilities of even the most seasoned technical divers who had trained him. The sea, they said, does not forgive mistakes, and in its depths, even the slightest error can be fatal. The first light of dawn had barely begun to seep through the edges of the horizon when Juan Francisco Villa Honorato set out on what would unknowingly be the final phase of his extraordinary journey. The road stretched out before him, winding through the rural landscapes of Nakhon Ratchasima province in northeast Thailand. For the past 4.5 years, Juan Francisco, a 47-year-old Chilean cyclist, had pedaled his way across the world, crossing vast deserts, dense forests, towering mountains, and bustling cities. What began in November 2010 as a dream, to set a Guinness World Record by cycling 250,000 kilometers across 5 continents over 5 years, had turned into a remarkable journey of endurance, passion, and discovery. Throughout his journey, Juan Francisco was driven by a love for cycling. His bicycle, a sturdy, weather-beaten machine that had seen more of the world than most people ever would, had become an extension of his body. The 2 wheels carried him through 49 countries and across 4 continents, South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia. With every turn of the pedals, he had conquered challenges that few could even imagine. The suffocating heat of the Sahara, the biting cold of the European winter, and the monsoon rains in Southeast Asia. Yet through it all, Juan Francisco had remained focused on his goal, his spirit unbroken by the physical and mental toll the journey demanded. Alongside him for parts of this odyssey were his wife and their 2-year-old son, who followed on another bicycle. The small family, often seen by locals as a heartwarming spectacle, had become a symbol of resilience and unity. It was unclear exactly when they had joined him, but the image of a family cycling together through foreign lands captured the hearts of many who encountered them. Their journey was as much about exploring the world as it was about staying together, bound by love and a shared vision. As they rode along the highway on Saturday, February 21, 2015, the traffic was sparse, with occasional car or truck passing by, and the landscape around them being a patchwork of green fields and distant hills. Juan Francisco led the way, his thoughts likely drifting between the countries he had visited and the few that remained before he would complete his record-breaking ride. The finish line was within reach. Less than a year remained before he would reach the 250,000-kilometer mark, completing his epic 5-year journey. But fate is often cruel, and it was on this quiet stretch of road that tragedy would strike. A pickup truck speeding recklessly came barreling down the highway. The driver, careless and indifferent to the safety of others, lost control of the vehicle. The truck swerved violently, its tires skidding on the pavement before it veered directly into the path of Juan Francisco. The impact was sudden and devastating, leaving no time for reaction. The truck collided with Juan Francisco's bicycle with a force that could only end in disaster. Juan Francisco was thrown from his bike, the force of the crash leaving him with no chance of survival. The force of the collision was so severe that the truck itself flipped over, landing on its roof with a sickening crumple. The chaotic scene that followed was one of shattered metal, broken glass, and the twisted remains of a bicycle that had once carried a man across continents. In the immediate aftermath, the highway was a scene of shock and horror. The driver of the pickup, dazed and injured but alive, was quickly arrested by the local authorities. Charged with causing death by dangerous driving, he was taken into custody but later released on bail, a fact that would haunt those who knew Juan Francisco and his family. Amid the wreckage, Juan Francisco's wife, who had been riding just behind him with their son, was left to grapple with the unimaginable. She and their child had survived the crash, but their world had been shattered in an instant. The love of her life, the father of her child, lay lifeless on the roadside, his ambitious journey brought to an abrupt and tragic end. A slight sprain was all she suffered physically, but the emotional toll of that moment was beyond comprehension.